Hi everyone, welcome to another Fireside chat where I'm joined by another one of our all-star alumni. Here we have Ryan, who is Director of Product at Spiketrap. Ryan, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Ellen. Pleasure to be here.
So I want to dive into like what your career path was, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about what your journey into product was like and how product school fit into that for you.
For sure. So my journey into product was rather circuitous, actually. There's never really one straight path that gets into it because you don't really major in that sort of thing in undergrad, common to a lot of misconceptions that I get from undergrads that are interested in product management. I started my career actually as an investment banking analyst at Credit Suisse in New York. I was working with companies primarily in tech, media, and telecom. I was in that industry group. And so I got a lot of exposure to companies that had really, succeeded, that were definitely winners in their category and were at the late stage in which they wanted to raise capital at that point. But I found that I was more interested in understanding what actually made them winners in the first place. Why was it that the products that they had made were actually so successful compared to their peers? So early on at Credit Suisse, I was actually on Quora quite often, just looking up what is product management, how to product management, because a friend of mine was an RPM at Facebook and she was loving it. And as you know, 100-hour work weeks in investment banking can get a little bit grueling. And I just kept seeing this person popping up on all the questions that I was looking at, just answering with these super long paragraphs. And it was Carlos Villanbrosia, the founder and CEO of Product School, was answering all these things. This is back in like 2014. When product school was like hardly a twinkle in his eye. And I thought to myself, this guy seems to know what he's talking about. Like I should just ask him, what's going on here. So I shoot him an email and then he responds. We get on the phone, we're chatting about just product school, about how to break into PMing. And at the time, I wasn't really interested in leaving investment banking at that point because I still had a lot to learn and a lot to do. And they only had their cohorts in Mountain View and the San Francisco Bay Area. So when Carlos said, "I would love for you to, be one of our first cohorts out here," I was like, "Carlos, I don't really want to quit my job right now to go into a boot camp. With all due respect, but let's keep in touch. And when you're in New York, then we can chat." So a year goes by, and I started to learn a lot more about how to do my job well and how to save a lot of time. I taught myself VBA to script a lot of the work that I was doing so I could just automate my time away. And then Carlos posts something that says that he's launching his first cohort in New York. And so I reach out to him. I say, "Hey, is there any space left in this cohort?" He's like, "There's one spot left," which may have been a selling tactic on his part. But I said, "Okay, gosh, let's do it. Fine." So I joined the first cohort for product school in New York in winter of 2015. And from there, I used that as an opportunity to just kind of validate for myself whether or not product management was something that I was interested in doing, or if those workflows were actually intriguing to me. And as you can probably tell, the answer was resoundingly yes. I very much enjoyed the kind of work that we were doing, the people that I was meeting. It was much more engaging, actually learning at the operator level what makes really good products. And so much so that at the conclusion of that, I started looking at opportunities outside of investment banking because I didn't really want to go down that path anymore. And eventually, through one connection or another, landed at Uber Eats as the team's first product analyst, which was bridging sort of the analytical background that I had in investment banking with this product background that I wanted to lean into. And at Uber Eats, I worked with a lot of PMs, many of whom are still some of my strongest mentors. That extended into a number of moonshots across the rest of the organization, where I was shipping a lot of tools that brought product and analytics together. Until eventually, I was actually leading teams in data science and AI applications within Uber on some really hard operational balancing problems, marketplace problems. Eventually, that gave way to COVID when Uber decided to jettison that team in favor of a Lime investment. I was on Jump at the time, And I looked around at a few self-driving car startups because of my experience within AI and automation within Uber. But eventually found that I was more attracted to the commercial applications for natural language processing, which is much more near term than computer vision for self-driving cars. And through a connection at Uber, I met this investor in a small company called Spiketrap, which built this really powerful system of connected natural language processing models in order to scrape the internet to understand what people are saying about different brands and intellectual property, and then selling that information back to the IP owners in the form of a clever dashboard that they can use to track their stuff. So I saw the sophistication of what they had built here and knew that given my experience within business from investment banking, within AI, to actually understand the technical components of what it takes to build AI products, and then my product background as well, that this AI product manager role that we were carving out for me would be a very good fit for both myself and for the team, which was only about 15 people at the time. So that's how I eventually got into this role in Spiketrap. And product school, going all the way back to about 5 or 6 years ago, was an instrumental component in validating for me that I did not want to actually stay in investment banking. And I could feel more comfortable actually taking a bigger risk in my career by taking a step back, thinking a little bit more clearly about what is it that I want to do, and then pounding the pavement until I found an opportunity that was much more aligned with product.
That's such an interesting, like, long and winding road.
Yeah, I know. It's hard to get it into a short version because they're like, how does all that connect? I'm like, it doesn't, but it does.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so nice for us. One of the best things for us about turning 7 and having our big 7th anniversary is that we're finally able to see like what happened to those first few students, like you, one of our first New York students, because we do see quite quick payoff with a lot of our students where they take the PMC and then a few months later they've landed their first product job. And of course that's wonderful, but being able to see like all of it, like the full journey across the last 5 years, that's really great for us.
Yeah, there are two other people in my cohort actually, Lucy Huang and Ebony Shears, both of whom are VP of product at Lucy was formerly at CB Insight. She's at a new thing called Storyblocks now, and Ebony, I believe, is still at Forbes. But both of them are absolutely crushing it. Female leaders in product, both of whom were in my cohort. So I'm just following in their footsteps.
You're like the winning cohort. Like you guys won. You won the product management game.
Sure.
So there was a word or a concept that you mentioned in that I really picked up on, and it was this idea of moonshots, which is what you were using at Uber. Was that something that you used specifically at Uber, or is it something that you like using throughout your career as a product manager?
Well, moonshots is really just kind of a catch-all term for if you have a company that's large enough and has enough shared resources, then you can spend money to make money. You can take some pretty ridiculous bets and put a team of talented people behind it to see if there's actually some wheels on this, so to speak. In the case of Uber, the moonshot that I was working on was Uber Elevate, which was flying cars or aerial ride sharing. Flying cars is easier to say. People are like, oh, okay, like the Jetsons. I'm like, sure. But aerial ride sharing is a better descriptor of the concept. The idea being back in 2016, late 2016, I think, sorry, not late 2016, early 2016, the team had, including Travis Kalanick, had written a white paper that basically laid out the future of Uber, saying, look, we're eventually going to get to a point in which it doesn't matter how many people you try to carpool, you're going to hit a capacity of vehicles on the road, and thus a limit on the amount of ETA that you can actually shave off. The only way for us to actually be able to handle new types of trip profiles, say from San Francisco to San Jose in 15 minutes, is if we utilize a third dimension using flight. And you tell that to people and I was like, okay, that's crazy. Like, how are you going to be able to do that? How do you make the economics work? People have been doing helicopters for a while, and that doesn't seem to work out too well. Well, it's a combination of the right technology, the right people, but most importantly, the right market application. You have lots of companies like Bell and Pipistrel that have the vehicle capability to build these things, but you actually need to have the promise of a product market fit that makes sense both from a conceptual perspective, but also from an economic perspective that encourages these manufacturers to build these things with very long lead times. So in the case of Uber, we already had this massive rider network and the demand already built up of all of these riders and the profiles of where they want to go. So we knew that we could distribute the costs of manufacturing these vehicles, which we wouldn't do. We would, have people manufacture the vehicles and then put it on our network. We would distribute the costs over many, many, many trips, and thus get the cost per mile down to a level that is actually appropriate. That's what the white paper had outlined, and that's what we were working on. So Moonshot just being, let's take this crazy idea, like using 3 dimensions for ride sharing instead of 2, and then say, well, what do we need to believe in order for this to actually happen, in order for this to make sense? So I use that same framework a lot in most of what I do, which is a big combination of economic modeling, product market fit estimations, TAM sizing, that sort of thing. And then just interviewing lots of people who are much smarter than me in order to validate what are the technical limitations of the technology today. And is there anything aside from the laws of physics that would keep us from actually making that happen?
Nice. Are there any sort of moonshot ideas that you would love to work on yourself? Just like when you're daydreaming, you think, yeah, that would be great if I could work on that.
Still, the aerial ride sharing is a big component of that for me. Of course, living out in Utah, that's a little bit less so these days. I can get to where I need to go, no problem. Or I can maybe just send a Raven to go get it. But the other product that I worked on while I was on Elevate, which I enjoyed, was drones. This was kind of a testing ground to use delivery drones with the same airspace management software to deliver food rather than people. So it was kind of a testing ground that was much lower risk than actually moving people around, just to demonstrate that we could autonomously control these types of aircraft and ensure a certain degree of safety with it. I still very much believe in the value that can actually deliver for alleviating food deserts across the United States by delivering, packages from grocery stores to people in impoverished communities. Nuro is another autonomous vehicle company that I'm very bullish on, because they utilize actual roadways to handle most of those autonomous trips rather than being on the sidewalks where they're constrained. So I certainly see a world in which we're more cleverly using autonomous vehicles to handle these types of trips, and thus expand the ability for people to actually get proper nutrition rather than being limited to whatever's within about a 5-minute driving distance from their house, which is typically a McDonald's or something like that. I mean, you have a country like the United States that has that's up there with some of the highest income per capita on the planet, but also has the highest obesity rates. So it's not because people are dining out on caviar all the time. It's because there's such a wide disparity in the ability for people to actually afford, both in terms of time and money, quality ingredients and quality food. And I think that it's a bigger problem than it needs to be. So that's something to think about a lot.
Absolutely. I guess that's one of the things with moonshot ideas, is that they seem so out there and futuristic that it's hard to apply them as solutions to real problems that we have now. So you hear like drone shipping food and you think like, oh, that sounds great, but yeah, what's it actually going to do aside from getting my Uber Eats burger to me any quicker? No, it's to fix food deserts. It's like, yeah, it has real applications for real world problems. So I'm dying to dive into AI a little bit, which, full disclosure, I know nothing about, but I'm dying to get into it anyway.
Sure.
So how do you see AI as shaping the future of product management in a way? Because it's one of the things that I've heard repeatedly is the next big skill that most product managers will need to pick up eventually if they want to progress in their career. Do you think that's something that you would agree with?
Oh, absolutely. I absolutely do. The best way to understand artificial intelligence or just applied machine learning is to just think of any machine learning model as an optimization tool. As long as you've constructed the right goal for this model, the right goal that you want to achieve, whether it's to maximize engagement or to minimize costs or to minimize ETA or something like that, these models can do that with aplomb, like very well, as long as you've also curated the right features and you're monitoring its performance in production, and you're constantly identifying what are the cases in which it's not doing so well. So you can try to find more cases like that, train it to be better, and then continuously improve it over time. Most people hear AI and they think, I just watched the Mitchells versus the Machines on Netflix last night, and it's so funny. But I was constantly getting questions from my partner saying, like, so you don't think like that's a little bit like what you do? I'm like, it's not at all like what I do. This is, it's a kids movie. But it's a tool like anything else. So the trick is understanding that instead of shipping products linearly, instead of shipping something and then saying, oh, we'll just monitor the success metrics and it's done and we'll move on to the next thing. When you're shipping a product that actually has a machine learning component to it, maybe it is an object recognition, or maybe it's a tool that's like a camera with object recognition that is used for self-driving. You don't have to ship it once and then you're done, right? You're shipping loops. You're shipping virtuous loops. You're not shipping individual products on a linear basis. You actually need to understand, one, how do we get enough data to get this thing up and running in the first place? And then two, how are we going to create a continuous stream of new production data or new data that's happening in the real world in order to, for us to see and validate what are these edge cases that it's not doing so well at, so we can continuously improve it over time. Because guarantee, if you just ship something and then you never revisit it, if associated with AI and machine learning, then its performance is going to drop off pretty quickly. And this is one of the number one reasons, I think, why most enterprises that have tried to invest in artificial intelligence for a lot of their internal workflows end up being disappointed by the results, because they haven't really thought about, or they've overhyped expectations, right? They promise, this Mitchell versus the Machines type of HAL interface where it's going to do everything for you. Or they have forgotten to actually build the loop. So when they finally take something that's worked really well on tests and then put it into production, and they say the real world is a lot harder than a testing environment, then the executive sponsors who don't understand this as much say, oh, well, it's not working out. We'll just go back to using humans for this. You need to be building these loops instead. Most PMs, I think, don't understand this yet because they're a little bit intimidated whenever they see AI on something, or they like to use AI as a marketing buzzword, which is a pet peeve of mine that I hate a lot. But the challenge is understanding the data that goes into it, the model that you're using, and then how you're going to create a virtuous loop of new data to continuously improve it. If you're not doing that, then you're not actually shipping an AI product.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other common mistakes that you see product teams or companies in general making with AI?
Yeah, I touched on it just a second ago, but it's primarily using AI as a marketing buzzword. So when your commercial team is leveraging that in any of their sales cycles, and they have not spoken to the engineering team, or they have not spoken to the product sponsor, and they just kind of go rogue and promise the moon to customers because in their eyes it's like, sure, whatever gets to sell. I don't mean to say that all commercial teams do this. There is a tendency and a pressure and incentive to get the sell, and for many customers they may not fully understand or appreciate what practical or applied artificial intelligence actually can do for their use case. They just assume it'll do everything for me. And it's easy to kind of lean into that as a sales rep and say, yes, it will. And I'll just close, and then we'll let somebody else figure it out. So you need to have that interaction with the commercial team so that there's a proper mind share of what are the practical limitations and what are the best applications for it. So at Spiketrap, myself and the VP of business development work very closely together, almost as like a dynamic duo in most sales calls, because we're small enough that I get to do that. Where anytime he's brought the charm, he's got the initial meeting down, But the other team has certainly brought what I usually refer to as a BS detector. Maybe it's their VP of engineering or someone who comes in to say, okay, are these guys just blowing smoke by talking a whole lot of AI speak, and they don't actually know what they're talking about? Let's let our VP of engineering figure that out. And then I show up and I actually say, okay, here's what we're actually doing. Here's the architecture. Here's how it's relevant to you, and what you can expect and what you shouldn't expect. And by coming to the fore with that knowledge and with that understanding, just upfront for them to see, it gives them a lot more confidence that we're not just trying to sell them snake oil, and we're not just trying to use whatever hashtags are trending as a sales tactic. So ensuring that you have a good relationship with and the right amount of mind share with your biz dev team so that you can avoid those common pitfalls, because they will result in churn when the customers realize that whatever they were being sold is not what they actually have, because you haven't built those loops or because somebody promised the moon.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me a little bit of that moment in the original Star Wars trilogy with like, this is the AI product that you're looking for. That's what it brings to mind for me.
A little bit.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like a lot of the common pitfalls surrounding AI come from other parts of the business not really understanding what AI is. So how
and customers too. So it's kind of a lack of understanding of honestly most people.
So how would you, as a product leader, maybe especially internally with management and marketing teams, how do you actively go about sort of being the voice or the translator for AI across the business?
So I have a very close relationship with our founder and chief scientist, who is effectively the architect of all of our models, our knowledge graph, and everything. And we have a standing weekly in which we use to discuss what are the big things coming down the line, what are the bottlenecks that currently exist within the architecture. And I force myself to get as up to speed on these things as he is, so that if he's out of the room or if he's not on a sales call, which he's not always there, I can be that voice and I can understand deeply, not just parrot what he's saying, but understand what are the practical problems that we're working on, and what can we expect in the next 3, 6, 12 months from the AI side. Additionally, internally, because we're a reasonably like eng heavy company, because we're a small startup, and you honestly should be if you're a software or AI company and you're at this stage. What I also do is I've put together a lot of, I've made it kind of a challenge for myself to take a lot of AI concepts and then condense them down into, say, like 100 characters or less to explain, say, what is supervised machine learning, or what is, say, precision versus recall, and some other things like that, which come up quite often in conversations with customers and internally. So if you can't explain it to a 5-year-old, you're not doing it too well. And I think that there's a lot of people out there who just want someone to Eli 5 AI or ML for their application. They don't need to know all the internals. They just need to know, how is this going to help me do my job faster, better, more accurate?
So it's more about knowing how to ask and answer the right questions than it is about making sure everyone's got a complete education in it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't need to in a sales call explain to them. There go the owls, by the way. They're flapping around. I don't need to in a sales call explain like, oh, we have a knowledge graph based approach that uses embeddings and so on and so forth, because it's all going to go way over their head and their eyes are going to glaze over and they're going to be thinking about last night's football game. Instead, I just need to think about, what's your biggest pain point, what can be automated, and how do we ship that quickly?
Mm-hmm. And going back to your career path for a second, it was interesting that you made the move from sort of banking into AI product. What was that transition like for you? Were there any skills that you took from your earlier career that have helped you in product management?
Well, yeah. Prior to banking, when I was my senior year of college, I taught myself Python and just played around because I was bored. It was my last year, and I wanted to spend time doing something productive, and found that I really enjoyed it. So scripting a lot of things that I was doing in my day to day. I actually built a Dogecoin miner on 4 Raspberry Pis that I had hooked up together and connected them all, and used Python, SQLite, and a few other things to actually create a Twitter bot that would notify me whenever it actually successfully mined a coin, or mined a block rather. So just pet projects like that help me kind of think a little bit more, not from a formal programming education, but just more from a hacker mentality of how to, just make something happen. That got extended into banking when I would get so frustrated with just how much time I would spend on something as basic as just spreading comps or doing pricing updates, or in more advanced cases later on, accretion dilution models in the super complicated model that we had built out, that I decided, to hell with this, I'm just going to automate this. So I can't use Python because it's a company laptop and they're super restricted on stuff, but I could use Microsoft Visual Basic for applications. So I just created a bunch of macros, wrote a whole lot of scripts to automate all those things. And then eventually my days went from, spending 8 hours on a model to spending, like 1 minute having pressed a button, it running through everything and then cleaning up the outputs in PowerPoint. So then my associates and VPs are like, how the hell are you, what are you doing here? Like, what's happening? Do you have like some gnome or something in your computer that's doing all this for you? I'm like, no, it's just this, this thing. And I pull up the scripts and the code and all that. That type of hacker mentality has definitely assisted in thinking more and more of how to be lazy, of how to get my job done. Yeah, work smarter, not harder. And while I was at Uber, the stakes just got higher and higher for that sort of thing. I was using more Python, I was using more SQL, but eventually I was bumping up against these limitations once again that, made me think to myself, boy, it'd be a lot easier if there was some formalized way in which I could look at markets that had performed very, very similarly in the past 60 days or so, and then use that to inform what or the likelihood that we're going to have a really successful launch in this new market with a certain amount of supply that we add there. And then one of my friends in the data science team had kind of mentored me a little bit in using some basic ML stuff through scikit-learn and other Python modules. And that's when I got introduced into actually using ML to do a lot of those things, which would have taken several hours before in a model, to then automating it very quickly. And everything just kept expanding from there. The more they're still flapping around. The more that my career is going, the more I'm finding those limitations on what can be done. And then just thinking to myself, well, how do I get around this? Because I don't want this to get in the way. And AI and just applied machine learning is another route for that.
Absolutely. I'm so devastated that we're running out of time, because I could ask you like easily 20 or 30, maybe even 100 more questions. But since we are running out of time, I'm just going to ask you one more. Sure. What do you think is the greatest lesson that product management has ever taught you?
Ooh, you saved a good one for last.
Oh, yeah.
The greatest lesson that product management has ever taught you. I'd say data-driven storytelling. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is I meet a lot of new grads and people who are early on in their career that are pursuing PM roles for many reasons. But the most common one that I hear from them is saying, oh, it's like being a mini CEO. And I'm like, you couldn't be further from the truth. It's not at all like being a mini CEO, because you have no authority whatsoever, but you have all the responsibility to take this vision that you might have, which comes from many sources, inspiration comes from many places, and then bring it to reality. All right. You are not a manager of engineers. They have an eng manager for that. You are not a manager of data scientists. You have a data science manager for that. All that you have to be able to do is to articulate this vision, this story, in a way that makes sense to many different audiences, either simultaneously or in rapid succession, so that you can actually make it happen on time and under budget. You can't do that by just coming in and saying, I have this great idea, and then not follow it up with anything. At Uber, the culture was, if you have an idea, but no data, that's just an opinion, and opinions are a dime a dozen. But if you come in and you say, hey, I've made these observations, I have this hypothesis, here's some data to back it up, then even if, and this happened to me personally, even if you're talking to Ryan Graves and he doesn't like what you're saying, and he called me out before on this, says, I think that you haven't done your homework enough on this. You need to go back and do a bit more. And then you go back and you do it and you verified, actually, no, this is, I think, validating my hypothesis here. You will still be able to win hearts and minds. So you need to understand how to get the data that you need to back up what your hypothesis is. Because if you can't do that, then you're never going to be able to convince anybody in the organization that they should be focusing on this idea that you've written down. So data-driven storytelling, I think, is one of, if not the most important takeaway that I've gleaned from product management.
Mm-hmm. And it works across so many different boards as well, not just products, if you let the numbers tell the story. Yeah. Well, as I said, devastated that we've run out of time. This has been so fun, such a pleasure to catch up. Thank you everyone for joining us. And more importantly, Ryan, thank you so much for being here and chatting with me today.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, we'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Bye.